She leaned in, bit her lip, and whispered, "I'll make you forget her." And just like that, everything I thought I knew about love shifted. I first noticed her in the quiet spaces, the small, unguarded moments no one else seemed to pay attention to. My girlfriend's little sister moved through the apartment with a kind of effortless grace that made ordinary things feel a little extraordinary. When she brewed her tea in the morning, the steam curled up around her face, and I could see the faintest smile as she inhaled the scent of chamomile. It was the kind of smile that belonged to someone who found little wonders in the mundane, and for some reason, I couldn't look away. I caught myself watching the way her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulder, the way she tucked a loose strand behind her ear with a flick of her wrist. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet somehow magnetic. The warmth of her presence seemed to linger even after she had left the room, like a scent clinging to the corners of my mind, impossible to ignore. I started noticing other things too. The quiet hum of her laughter while she flipped through a book in the living room, the gentle tap of her fingers against the kitchen counter as she hummed a tune I didn't recognize. There was an ease in the way she existed, a softness in her movements that contrasted with the firmness in her eyes, the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing yourself, even if you sometimes feel vulnerable underneath. Sometimes she'd brush past me while reaching for a plate in the cupboard, and our hands would graze for a fraction of a second. Just a touch, but long enough to send a ripple of awareness down my arm. It wasn't electric in the cliché sense. There was no dramatic spark, but it was a subtle, grounding warmth, like the faint pulse of a heartbeat beneath the skin. I'd step back, reminding myself that this was innocent, yet I couldn't stop replaying the sensation in my mind. Her attention to small details fascinated me. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking, or the way her eyes softened when she looked at someone she cared about. I began to notice that I paid closer attention to her than I did to anything else in the apartment. The way sunlight caught the highlights in her hair, the curve of her smile when she laughed at something only she found funny, even the quiet sigh she let out when she sank into the couch after a long day. And somewhere in the midst of these observations, I realized I felt a strange, unfamiliar pull. It wasn't desire in a conventional sense, not yet. It was curiosity, admiration, a quiet longing to know her more deeply than the surface allowed. I knew I had to be careful, had to respect boundaries, but that didn't stop me from noticing. Every glance, every small gesture became a story I couldn't stop reading, each one a brushstroke painting a portrait of someone far more complex than I had imagined. Even now, as I write this, I can feel the lingering warmth of those first observations, the soft cadence of her voice, the subtle weight of her presence in a room, the quiet, almost imperceptible way she had started to occupy more space in my thoughts than I would admit. And in that quiet, I understood that this story, whatever it was going to be, had already begun. It started with something as ordinary as a bookshelf. My girlfriend had left me with her little sister for a few hours while she ran errands, and the two of us found ourselves in the living room, surrounded by stacks of books that needed organizing. I had expected the task to be mundane, but somehow, with her there, every small action felt charged with a quiet intimacy I hadn't anticipated. She reached for a book just as I did, and our fingers brushed. The touch was fleeting, barely a second, yet it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I felt a warmth spread up my arm, a subtle reminder that her presence was more than just comforting, it was magnetic. She laughed softly at my startled reaction, a sound like wind chimes stirred by a gentle breeze, and I caught myself lingering on the smile that followed. As we rearranged the shelves together, there was an ease to the way we moved around each other. Sometimes our knees bumped accidentally, or our shoulders grazed as we leaned to reach the same shelf. I noticed the small details, the way her blouse caught the light, the faint perfume that clung to her, a delicate, calming scent, and I found myself taking a deep breath whenever we stood close. When a heavy stack of books proved too cumbersome, I instinctively reached to help her lift it. Our hands met around the edge of the pile, fingers intertwined for just an instant. I could feel the soft heat of her palms, the subtle pressure of her grip, and in that moment, I became acutely aware of how close we were standing. Her gaze met mine, steady and unflinching, and for a heartbeat, words felt unnecessary. Everything unspoken hung between us like a delicate thread, fragile yet undeniable. Later, as we settled onto the couch to catch our breath, she shifted closer, curling her legs beneath her. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, acutely aware of the invisible boundaries, and yet I couldn't help but notice the quiet rhythm of her breathing so near to mine. Her shoulder brushed mine, lightly, almost imperceptibly, and it sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. There was no rush, no urgency, just a closeness that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I found myself observing the small things, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the softness of her laugh as she teased me about dropping a book, the gentle warmth of her shoulder pressing against mine when we reached for the same cushion. Every movement, every accidental touch, seemed amplified, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of us in that room. By the time my girlfriend returned, I felt a strange ache of reluctance. The ordinary task of shelving books had become a series of fleeting, intimate moments that lingered in my mind long after she had left the couch. I realized, with a mixture of guilt and fascination, that the closeness I had once thought accidental was quietly reshaping the way I felt about her. It was subtle, unspoken, and entirely consuming. And as I left the living room that evening, I understood something crucial. This wasn't just a fleeting brush of hands or shared laughter. Something deeper was beginning to stir, something I couldn't name yet, but I knew it would change everything. The next few days carried a strange electricity, subtle yet undeniable. It wasn't overt, nothing dramatic, just the quiet rhythm of two people orbiting each other with an unspoken awareness. One evening, we found ourselves in the kitchen, attempting to bake something neither of us was particularly skilled at. Flour dusted the counter, and the faint, warm smell of vanilla hung in the air. She laughed, a soft, melodic sound, as I fumbled with the measuring cups, and I realized that even in a mundane activity, her presence made everything feel alive. She leaned in to grab the sugar from the shelf, and our shoulders brushed again, lighter this time, more deliberate. I caught a whiff of her perfume, something floral, subtle, comforting, and it made my chest tighten. There was a playful gleam in her eyes, a mischievous tilt to her smile, as if she knew the effect she had on me. I told myself to focus on the batter, to not let my thoughts wander, yet every accidental touch felt like a spark igniting something I wasn't ready to name. When she teased me about spilling flour on the counter, she didn't just laugh. Her gaze held mine, lingering longer than casual teasing warranted. I noticed the way her lips curved, the small bite she gave her lower lip, the way her eyes softened and then sharpened with amusement. My own lips twitched in a reluctant smile, and I realized that the room had shrunk around the two of us. Each glance, each shared laugh, seemed amplified, charged with a tension neither of us admitted aloud. Later, we moved to the living room with the tray of cookies, and the teasing continued. She challenged me to a game of chess, sitting close on the couch, her leg brushing against mine. The proximity made my pulse quicken, her subtle movements, the tilt of her head as she studied the board, and the way she would occasionally glance at me, caught me off guard. I tried to focus, tried to strategize, yet I couldn't ignore the quiet magnetism in her presence. There were moments when she would reach for a piece at the same time as I did, and our fingers would graze again, slightly longer this time. My mind screamed for caution, for distance, yet my body reacted before reason could intervene, a warmth spreading through me at the simplest, most innocent contact. It was intoxicating in a way that felt dangerous and thrilling all at once. And yet, beneath the playful teasing, there was a vulnerability in her eyes I hadn't noticed before. A fleeting hesitation, a subtle softness, that hinted at a depth beneath the confident, teasing surface. I found myself wanting to see past the playful mask, to understand her more fully, even as I struggled with my own growing awareness of how drawn I was to her. By the end of the evening, the cookies were eaten, the chessboard abandoned, and the room was filled with the comfortable glow of lamplight. We lingered, sitting close, talking about nothing and everything, our laughter soft, our shoulders brushing occasionally. The tension was there, undeniable, yet unspoken, an intricate dance of proximity, glances, and touches that promised something more without ever naming it. And as I left that night, I realized with a quiet thrill and an uneasy pang that the playful tension wasn't going away. If anything, it was just beginning, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to make itself known. The playful tension between us had settled into something quieter, more fragile. It was during one of those late afternoons, when sunlight slanted through the curtains in warm, lazy stripes across the floor, that I saw her differently, beyond the teasing smiles and mischievous glances. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, a notebook open on her lap, and for a long moment she just stared at the page, lost in thought. I hesitated, unsure if I should interrupt, but the pull to be near her, to offer some kind of comfort, was too strong to resist. "Everything okay?" I asked softly, my voice careful, almost hesitant. She looked up, her eyes catching mine, shimmering with something she wasn't ready to name. There was a vulnerability there that she rarely allowed anyone to see, an openness that made my chest tighten. She shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and for a moment, I simply watched her breathe, noticing the rise and fall of her shoulders, the faint tension in her hands as she clutched her pen. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I guess I'm just overwhelmed sometimes." Her voice was soft, vulnerable, carrying the weight of things unsaid. I moved closer, careful not to crowd her, letting my presence be enough. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," I said, keeping my tone gentle, steady. But she did talk, eventually, sharing bits and pieces of her worries, the uncertainty at work, the pressure to live up to expectations, the quiet fear of disappointing people she cared about. Each word she spoke felt intimate, fragile, as if she were offering me a part of herself that few people ever saw. When her voice faltered, I reached out instinctively, resting a hand lightly on hers. The touch was simple, almost casual, but I could feel the warmth of her skin through mine, the subtle pulse beneath her fingers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand lingered for a moment, the tiniest pressure of reassurance exchanged between us. It was enough to make my heart thrum in a way I hadn't anticipated. We sat like that for a while, side by side on the couch, letting the silence carry us. She leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing mine, and I felt the quiet gravity of her presence, the way it drew me in without demanding anything. Her hair fell against my arm, soft and warm, and for a brief moment, I was acutely aware of every detail, the scent of her perfume, the gentle cadence of her breathing, the tender way she would glance at me as if measuring whether I understood. There was no rush, no forced closeness, only the steady, unspoken acknowledgement that we were both present, offering comfort and attention in a world that often demanded we hide our true selves. I realized then that what I felt for her was evolving. It wasn't just fascination or curiosity anymore. It was the quiet, profound desire to protect her, to understand her, to be someone she could rely on, even in the small, mundane moments. By the time she finally closed her notebook, there was a warmth between us that hadn't existed before, a closeness built not on flirtation or teasing, but on trust, honesty, and the fragile bravery of showing one's true self. And in that moment, I understood that the slow burn of our connection was deepening, weaving itself into something real, tender, and entirely unforgettable. The closeness we had built over the past few days began to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a brush of her hand as we passed a bowl of fruit, the almost imperceptible lean when we sat together on the couch. But the tension between us had started to thrum beneath the surface, a quiet vibration that made every accidental touch feel heavier, more charged. One evening, the three of us were in the living room after dinner, laughing over a movie my girlfriend had chosen. Her little sister had a way of leaning in during jokes, her shoulder brushing mine, her leg just barely touching my own. It was casual enough to seem innocent, yet the heat from her presence pressed against me, leaving me acutely aware of the space we shared. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain, equal parts excitement and guilt. Then came the moment that made everything shift. She turned toward me, a sly, almost dangerous smile playing at the corners of her lips. Her eyes met mine and held them, steady, searching. And then she said it. "Maybe I could make you forget her." Her voice was soft, almost teasing, yet there was an edge to it that made my stomach tighten. She bit her lower lip, just slightly, as if daring me to react, daring me to acknowledge the unspoken tension simmering between us. The room felt smaller, every sound amplified, the hum of the TV, the scrape of her fingers against the couch, the steady beat of my own pulse in my ears. I froze, caught between loyalty and desire, between the familiar boundaries I had always maintained and the pull towards something I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. Her gaze softened, vulnerable now, and in that fleeting moment, I saw the quiet longing in her eyes, the same longing I hadn't realized I carried for her. We continued to sit side by side, the silence stretching between us, heavy with possibility. Every accidental touch, the brush of her fingers as she reached for popcorn, the warmth of her hand as she rested it briefly on mine, was magnified. I felt the tug of temptation, the dangerous thrill of closeness that felt forbidden yet natural. My mind raced, debating the morality of the attraction, but my body betrayed me, leaning slightly toward her, savoring the faint pressure of her presence. And yet, amid the tension, there was also understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement of boundaries, a quiet hesitation that prevented us from crossing lines. She laughed softly at a joke on the screen, and I realized that beneath the flirtation, there was still the sister of my girlfriend, someone I cared for deeply and didn't want to hurt. The conflicting desires hung between us like a fragile thread. Desire, guilt, curiosity, and care all mingled in that intimate, weighty moment. Every glance, every subtle gesture, was charged with the knowledge that the attraction was there, undeniable, yet constrained by circumstances and conscience. By the time the evening ended, I was left with the echo of her words and the warmth of her presence lingering in my mind. I understood something fundamental. What I felt for her was real, powerful, and complicated, and the slow burn of our connection had reached a tipping point. The question now wasn't whether we felt it, but what we would do with it. After that evening, the tension between us didn't vanish, it shifted. It became softer, quieter, less urgent, but no less profound. The intensity of unspoken attraction had given way to a new kind of closeness, one grounded in understanding, trust, and subtle acknowledgement rather than daring words or fleeting touches. It was during one of those rare, rainy afternoons when the world outside blurred into muted gray that we found ourselves alone again. The soft patter of rain against the windows created a private cocoon, and the apartment felt warmer, more intimate. She was curled up on the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, a book in her lap, and I joined her, sitting just close enough for our legs to brush. The contact was accidental at first, a mere graze, but I felt the familiar warmth spread from the point of touch, a quiet reassurance that our closeness no longer needed to be provocative to be meaningful. She glanced up from her book, and our eyes met. There was no mischief this time, no teasing glint, just an openness and vulnerability that I hadn't fully appreciated before. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, voice low, almost a whisper, carrying a sincerity that made my chest tighten. It wasn't about flirting or desire, it was about presence, about feeling seen and understood. I reached out instinctively, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The motion was gentle, deliberate, yet unassuming. I could feel the faint heat of her skin, the subtle pulse beneath her hair as it grazed my fingers. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly into the touch, a quiet acknowledgement of trust, of connection. Her hand hovered near mine for a heartbeat, and then she rested it lightly on my arm. The warmth of her palm pressed softly against mine, grounding us both in the moment. We sat like that for a while, speaking in low tones about trivial things, the sound of the rain, a book she was reading, the odd charm of the neighborhood. There was no need for laughter to fill every pause, no need for dramatic declarations. Even in silence, the intimacy was profound. Every glance, every brush of skin against skin, carried meaning. Every shared breath, every subtle movement, was a reminder that we had crossed a threshold, from tension to trust, from curiosity to genuine emotional closeness. At one point, she leaned her head against my shoulder, her warmth radiating against me. I rested my cheek lightly against her hair, inhaling its faint floral scent. The gesture was simple, yet in it was a quiet acknowledgement of everything unspoken between us: affection, desire, hesitation, care. I could feel her heartbeat, steady but slightly faster than normal, and I knew she felt it too. By the time my girlfriend returned, we were still close, but nothing had been lost. There was no guilt, no betrayal, only a gentle, shared understanding. The quiet resolution wasn't about denying attraction, it was about recognizing it, respecting boundaries, and finding a way to cherish each other without causing harm. That afternoon left an imprint on me. It was a reminder that intimacy doesn't always need fireworks. It can be soft, quiet, and enduring. And in that quiet closeness, I realized something essential. Our bond had deepened in a way that was meaningful, honest, and entirely unforgettable. The days that followed felt different. The quiet resolution we had shared lingered like a soft afterglow, subtle yet persistent. Our interactions had shifted, not because the tension had disappeared, but because it had been transformed into something warmer, gentler, and profoundly human. There was no need for daring words, no pressure to act on feelings we couldn't name. Instead, there was comfort in the presence of someone who understood, someone who had seen both our curiosity and our restraint, and who still chose to stay close. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the apartment was filled with the gentle hum of the ceiling fan, the muted light of early autumn filtering through the curtains. My girlfriend had gone out for errands, leaving the two of us alone. She was seated on the couch, a sketchbook open on her lap, pencil tapping lightly against the paper. I joined her, sitting just close enough for our knees to touch. It was an accidental closeness at first, but there was no mistaking the warmth that traveled along that small point of contact. We talked quietly, our voices blending with the soft rustle of pages and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Her hand brushed mine as she turned a page, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my fingers linger near hers, feeling the subtle heat, the steady pulse of her presence. There was no need for more, just being there, just sharing the space, felt enough. At one point she set her pencil down and looked at me with a small, tender smile. "I'm glad we can, just be," she said softly. Her words were simple, yet they carried a depth that made my chest tighten. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It wasn't about crossing lines or indulging forbidden attraction. It was about a connection that had grown quietly, patiently, into something enduring and meaningful. I reached over, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, tucking it gently behind her ear. She leaned slightly into the gesture, her head resting near my shoulder for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I felt the faint warmth of her cheek against me, and the quiet steadiness of her breathing. In that shared moment, everything unspoken between us, curiosity, attraction, affection, restraint, settled into a gentle rhythm that was both comforting and profound. As the afternoon waned, I realized that the story of our connection didn't need dramatic declarations or fiery confrontations. It had evolved naturally, slowly, and beautifully. The tension had transformed into tenderness, the playful teasing into quiet understanding, and the moments of hesitation into gestures of care that carried far more weight than any words could. When my girlfriend returned later, the atmosphere was calm, warm, and unforced. There were smiles, shared laughter, and the easy companionship that came from honesty and respect. Her little sister remained close, but now it was a closeness defined by trust and mutual affection rather than tension or temptation. I knew that our bond had shifted, deepened, and settled into something lasting. As I reflected on the journey, I understood that the story had reached its natural conclusion. There was no need for further complication, only the quiet, enduring connection we had nurtured. And in that soft, human warmth, I felt a sense of completeness, a slow-burn romance resolved not with drama, but with presence, understanding, and the subtle intimacy of two people who had found each other in a way that was honest, tender, and unforgettable.